Last evening, we covered considerable territory. We carried ourselves through an introduction to chapter 12 and through 13, 14, and 15. A question or two was asked regarding the 666, and that could be elaborated on. There's considerable evidence on that. That happens to be the mark of the beast, which finds its way through this entire section. So in chapter 13, the mark of the beast is mentioned. Verse 17, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now this beast, you understand, was this second beast, verse 11, that had two horns like a lamb, but spoke like a dragon. It created an image. So the first beast is a Catholic, the beast referred to as a Catholic church, and the image is the Holy Roman Empire. Thus we have three that are mentioned. There was a first beast, but that beast was wounded and died. But the wound was healed and it was restored, which is the same thing as the image. And these three numbers help you to see the three Romes. The Roman Empire, then the emergence of the papacy, the Catholic Church, which in turn created an image of the first beast, or it became the Holy Roman Empire. It is especially noted for its blasphemy, because Holy Roman Empire denotes blasphemy. No man might buy or sell. We gave you three quotations from three different councils in which it was decreed that no one was permitted to buy or sell. And you'll notice that this was directed to the Roman Empire. They should not buy or sell with anyone that didn't have the mark. He doesn't tell us exactly what he means by mark. It was a practice, as I said last evening, to mark the slaves. And by the way, a little later on, these adherents are going to be called slaves. They were slaves, and they were marked slaves. But more than that, here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast. So he mentions the beast. Now that number of the beast would be that second beast or the Catholic Church. For it is the number of a man. We have to find a man with that name. And his number is 666 or 666. Today we talked with a young lady who asked us what that meant. Many people are curious. So it's a number, and as I pointed out last evening, that this is, of course, an accumulation of letters, because their numbers were always denoted by letters. So we have to come out with some combination of numbers that would have the equivalent of, that is, letters rather, have the equivalent in numbers of 666. The name of a man, of course, could well be a man by the name of Latinos, who was the supposed founder of the Roman Empire. And that added up by these various numbers would be the equivalent of 666. Now we're referring to the Greek and not the Roman. For instance, in the Greek, L is 30, A is 1, T is 300, E is 5, I is 10, N is 50, O is 70, and S is 200. So we're following the Greek because it was written in Greek. Happens to be a Latin name, of course. Now this is very handy. It's very simple. At least it answers the two things required. It is the name of the beast, and it's the number of a man. So an individual man plus a beast. There happens to be a little more to it than that. Many are impressed with the fact it might be the inscription on the Pope's mitre, which is Vicar of the Son of God. And that follows the Latin words that are on his mitre. And that also adds up to 666. There are many combinations. Just keep this in mind. This was to denote faithfulness to the Holy Roman Empire and the Catholic Church. That's what he's pointing out, faithfulness to it. But it so happens that Latin became the word that was used to indicate both the Latin Church. If you read church history, you'll read over and over about the Latin Church. You'll say, what is the Latin Church? It's thrown in contrast to the Greek Church. So they referred to the East as the Greek Church and the West as the Latin Church. But the same thing is true of the empires. The Greek Empire, the Latin Empire. So that word Latin was used in reference both to the Holy Roman Empire and to the Catholic Church throughout the Dark Ages. This, of course, will bring us tonight, keeping in mind the beast and the image, to chapter 16, which will be very important. We picked that up so that you'll be prepared for it. In chapter 16, we have given to us the pouring out of the bowls or the vials, 7 of them. And I heard a great voice out of the temple saying to the 7 angels, go your ways and pour out the vials of the wrath of God upon the earth. And the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worshipped his image. Now let me re-emphasize. Worship the image? How could they worship the Holy Roman Empire? Very simply. Calls your attention to Augustine's volume called The City of God. Volumes. It's like an encyclopedia in which at that early date of some 400, he envisioned the whole structure of what later became the Catholic Church. Now, Augustine is called the father of the Catholic Church. I wonder why the Catholic Church became what he envisioned, because that became the blueprint. We've already touched upon the fact that the Catholic Church ruled the kingdoms, set up the rulers, and deposed them, and controlled the entirety of Europe. Because Augustine saw an image, and on that image were 2 arms. One was the arm of the church, the Catholic Church, and the other was the arm of the state, or the governments. And the head of that image was the Pope himself, and he controlled the arms, said Mr. Augustine. He called him a bishop, Roman bishop, but that became a pope in, say, some 600. Now we'll see this functioning throughout the Dark Ages. So those who worshiped the beast and who worshiped the image were to suffer a noisome and grievous sore. Things were going to happen, my friend, upon the Catholic Church. You see, there had been a warning, and he's carrying the warning out. We have seen that the Catholic Church suffered much. Now we'll see that the Roman Catholic Church suffers even more. You will notice that on this Catholic Church, above it, is a darker color. It's about a brown. Supposed to be a purple, it is on our larger charts to show royalty. You notice how that as event after event occurred, that band widens. That's called the rise. There was a rise of the power of the papacy. There was a supremacy at the point of Innocent III, Guilty III. He was the strongest of the popes to control the rulers. Gregory the Great was strong. Innocent III was stronger. He deposed many of the rulers. And then, of course, Boniface VIII tried to do the same thing and failed twice. And you'll notice at that point is the beginning of the decline. That decline will not culminate until at the end, where you see old Catholics. That was at the council they had in 1800. So keep that in your thinking, that there will be a decline as we proceed tonight. This angel, first angel, sounded as a warning. I wonder what this could possibly be refer to. Let me just point out one thing, that this is the cause. This is the cause. Lying behind this is the fact that 130,000 Catholic officials, 140,000 nobles. You stop and think what this means. This is talking about 270,000 of the nobles and church officials in France owned 3/5 of 5/5 of all land in France. 3/5 out of 5/5. That meant 2/5 paid all the taxes for 5/5. They were oppressed. You see, in studying the eve of the French Revolution, you're studying about troublous times. For some many years there was a boiling cauldron of discontent, and they were ready to slice anybody's head off. They were talking to themselves in the ghettos and in the streets, waiting for a champion. And that began in 1789. That was before the French Convention, though. That was the cause. Charlemagne had started as the king of the Franks and became the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire in France, thus creating what was the Holy Roman Empire here. Later, that was changed from France to an area of Germany, and thus it became known in the Dark Ages as the Germanic Empire, or the German Empire. Still the same Holy Roman Empire, though. France was called the elder brother of the Catholic Church. She had championed the cause for a long, long time. And that cause was that the Catholic Church was to be held in power. Spain was strong. Some of the German emperors strong. You would think that Italy was strong, but France was the strongest. The effect. At one time, there were something like 200,000 people in prison in France in a single given period. 200,000. These were Catholics. They were either church officials or they were Catholic nobles that supported the Catholic Church. So from the standpoint of these atheists from various countries that moved in for the convention, they knew that if they brought France back to where she should be, they had to destroy the Catholic Church. And that they aimed to do. Now, Paris alone saw as many as 80 people hanged in a day. That went many days at a time. They were ridding France of a great boil. So take a look at what he says. There was a noisome and grievous sore upon the people that had the mark. It was. Verse 3. And a second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. So from the earth, we have the sea. It's much like we studied earlier. We saw the same basic idea carried of 4 here, but this time in the 4, in the fall of the west, it was the earth and the sea and the rivers and the sun. He's following the same pattern here. this time the sea. He sees it poured out upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every soul died in the sea. Prior to this time, the control of the seas had been a toss-up between Great Britain and France. Now we have a little bit more. Let's throw in Spain. Let's throw in Portugal. Let's throw in Holland. And between these Catholic-controlled countries, the seas in the United States, off its shores, much of the time, and around Europe, had been in the hands of the Roman Catholic navies prior to this time. Now we're going to see things begin to change. The mightiest navy struggle took place that the world had ever seen at that point. It was between chiefly England and these countries I have named: Holland, Portugal, Spain, France, and Italy. In 1780, now get in mind what we're talking about here, because we're talking about a period of time that is 1793, or the French Revolution. Just before that, in 1780, France and England were about even as far as their power was concerned, and also in the United States. There was a point in the United States that America would become Roman Catholic, but that's going to change. The Catholic countries eventually suffered, after a 20-year struggle, 600 ships of the main line and 400 smaller ships, and some have listed 200 battleships. Their back was broken, because at this time the Roman Catholic nations, these 5 nations, could not possibly support the Pope, particularly in America. Now in America, it's the place where all the countries were aiming. Let's take a minute out. Because the old world was decayed and the new hope was in the new world. And much of this struggle was between the two powers for the sake of the United States. Now, having been in Puerto Rico, I was very interested in going back through the history, because Puerto Rico, the port itself, means rich port, was the place where the Catholics were depositing much of their wealth. And that's where the struggle was. The English came in, the French came in. Eventually the English were victorious, the Americans moved in, and thus America took charge of Puerto Rico. But the early history was South America was being exploited, it was being deposited in Puerto Rico, from there transferred to other ships and taken to Europe. They wanted the United States as well as South America. But now they were defeated, and when they were defeated, it turned everything around. We're talking about the time when that happened. We're talking about the 1700s, or the 18th century. Verse 4, and the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and fountains of waters, and they became blood. And I heard the angel of the waters say, Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art and wast and shalt be, because thou hast judged thus. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink, for they are worthy. And I heard another out of the altar say, Even so, Lord God, almighty, true and righteous are thy judgments, poured out upon the rivers. This, my friend, would become a period of river victories. We're talking about sequence of dates. Now stepping on the scene was a gentleman who was 27 years of age. His name was Napoleon. He's been cussed and discussed by many historians. In 1796, Napoleon led 35,000 soldiers across the Alps into Italy. In 1797, he went to Rome and created an Italian republic, 1797. I'll tell you what he did. After the French Revolution had turned France around so that it was a better country than it was, he stepped in and took control. So what was a terrific blow against the Catholic Church, now it's going to be even a greater blow. Napoleon is now roaming Europe. He compelled the Pope to pay a tribute of 21 million francs. He demanded 100 of their best art pieces. These were taken back to France. In 1798, the next year, he took Pope Pius VI off the throne, took him a prisoner to France, and there he died. And if that's not enough, he then robbed the Vatican. Every significant battle that was fought was upon the banks of the Po, the Ada, the Lech, the Meuse, the Rhine, the Danube, the Littens, and others. Every single battle that he fought of any significance was upon a river. This is not coincidental. In 1800, the Pope was permitted to return to Rome, but only as it depended upon France. In 1804, he compelled the Pope to go to France and crown him Emperor of France. And he thus crowned himself the successor of the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, because he was deposed in 1805. He was taken off. I failed to put that on the church history chart, and I should add. That became the last of the Holy Roman Empire, and Napoleon took his place. Of course, by that time, the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire was a weak man with very little power, but that brought the end. This becomes extremely interesting, you see, as especially we come to the fifth bowl. Verse 8, and the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and power was given unto him to scorch men with fire, and men were scorched with great heat, and blasphemed the name of God, which hath power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. Now upon the sun itself, why I don't know, but in both instances, the sun is likened to the ruler himself. So this is going to be directed upon the Vatican. This will thus be called the defeat of the sun, or the defeat of the throne. The Pope was not crowned in Rome. The Pope was crowned in Venice. In 1808, Napoleon deposed Pope Pius VII and sent him as a prisoner on yon side of the Alps. Now you see, this is in reverse, isn't it, of what happened in the Dark Ages when the Pope was the king. And he was deposing emperors and setting emperors up. He was changing nations. He manipulated them just like they were puppets. Now he's being manipulated. This is a period described by historians as incessant war from 1796 unto 1818. Now 1815 really, we'll have the date 18 in just a moment. 2 million are known to have been killed in Europe in these battles. Led by Napoleon, incessant warfare, Thus, Europe was described as one monstrous military camp. There was fighting from one end to the other, to illustrate. He dethroned the king of Sardinia. He compelled the German emperor to renounce his title, the one I just told you about. He conquered Prussia, whose king had lost half of his territory, and he made his brother Jerome the king of Westphalia. He made his brother Louis king of Holland, and he made his brother Joseph king of Spain, and he made his general Murat king of Naples, and he was said to have set down 30 Roman Catholic rulers and replaced them with non-Catholic rulers. Does that mean anything to you tonight? When he has declared that he will take vengeance upon that beast that had 2 horns that looked like a lamb, but a mouth that spoke like a dragon, and dared to speak things against the Most High. Does that mean anything? God still rules on the universe. Let us never forget it. Never forget it. Let me show you this, that all of these countries, like Holland and Spain and France, that had the big navies, they don't even have Catholic rulers on now. He put his own brothers on. He did it right, I guess. It is said that from 1806 to 1818, quote, more kings were made and unmade during that period of time than the whole previous period of Christendom. More kings were made and unmade in just a few years' time than all the whole period of Christendom before that. And that would be almost 1,700 years. That, my friend, is absolutely marvelous. But he sees a 5th seal. 5th vial. And the 5th angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain and blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and repented not of their deeds. In the year of 1848, and you see that we're carrying a little farther now past Napoleon, in 1848, Pope Pius IX was driven from Rome by his own subjects. Does that mean anything to you? A man who sat upon the throne and ruled the kingdoms and ruled the people, and they were afraid of the Pope, and now they drove him out. He was disguised as a German physician and fled Rome for his life. By 1870, King Victor Emmanuel and his general Garibaldi seized the entire Papal States. You notice them here? Seized all of these away from the Catholic Church, leaving only 5 square miles. In 1929, Mr. Mussolini gave 108 acres back to him adjacent to the Vatican because he needed the Pope's blessing. Prior to that, the Papal States didn't exist. You know, I was alive when that happened. I remember reading that in the newspaper. How many were born then? I read again, verse 12. And the 6th angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the king of the kings of the east might be prepared. And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, out of the mouth of the false prophet. And they are the spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and of the whole world, to gather them to battle of that great day of God Almighty. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. Let's just kind of pick up a little bit from here to see where we are. There is now a new Turkey. You notice it states that the river Euphrates was dried up. Now, it's appeared before. We have seen the river Euphrates But now we are going to see it in a different light. It is dried up. Dried up. The old Turks will change. In 1915, the leader was called Kemal Ataturk, and he emerged as the hero of Gallipoli. The hero drove out the Greeks, defeated the French, forced the British to the sea, made a strong empire. He finally unseated the leader of the Turks that had sat there for 600 years, of the old line of families. Formed a new republic. Everyone from 6 years of age to 40 years of age had to learn to read and write. No longer ignorance. They became enlightened. A new Turkey. Women were educated. They were given the vote to right. Their veil came off. Hold office to vote. He took the fezzes off of the men and the harem away from the men. And a man could have only one wife. Now let me tell you something. It wasn't long before this that when these same Turks of the old 600-year line of Turks went into a village of an enemy, the first thing they did was to seek out women pregnant, women carrying a child. With their bayonet, they would rip them wide open and put the baby on the end and run down the streets yelling while the mother died. That, my friend, was common practice. Carrying around clubs and driving their wives to work. They had no regard for women. If we think we need women's liberation today, I tell you, we don't know what we're talking about. Because the world in general has never honored women. Christianity does. This man had something new, a new concept, and the old Euphrates, the old Turk was dried up and something else took its place. But I want you to see that there are these frogs. He said they're like frogs. Verse 13 came out of the mouth of the dragon, paganism, out of the mouth of the beast, Catholicism, plus out of the mouth of false prophet. That was the one introduced earlier, Mohammedanism. And thus we have the three basic units of religion. We don't have anything else. Nothing else. They all fall in those categories. Somebody says, what about Judaism? All you have to do is study Judaism a little bit. That's paganism, pure and simple. All you have to do is go back and study a little bit in the Muhammad and study of the things, the thinking that the Jews had in Jesus' day, and they were still idolaters. Idolaters to this day. But they still fall in the same basic concept. Thus we find Turkey at a point where she wanted more territory. Germany and Austria and Hungary all wanted to subjugate the Balkan area, all at the same time in the turn of the century. Now we're talking about past the 1800s, the beginning of the 1900s, just before World War I. At this point, keep in mind, Turkey wanted more territory to spread out, while Germany and Austria and Hungary all wanted the Balkan Peninsula. And the Vatican wanted more religious power. She had lost tremendously. And so on June the 24th in 1914, a secret treaty was framed by the Pope and signed by these countries. And that started World War I. The old saying is there are two reasons, the one that you give and the real reason. But this is what happened. So World War I was triggered simply because there was an effort on the part of these three to extend their effort. Now, I want you to notice something very significant here. People say, I wonder where we are now. I believe that we have to be right here in this period. Have been quite a while. Because out of the mouth of these old regimes that had lasted so long, set in their ways, would come a spirit out of Mohammedanism and a spirit out of paganism and a spirit out of Catholicism and Protestantism, the apostate church called Babylon. And that's exactly what happened. I think you can see this. They came out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, out of the mouth of false prophet. Two things are evident. Number one is identity. They're identified with these forms. So in that sense, they're separate, three of them. But the second thing you'll notice is that they work together. Even though they maintain their identity, there is a unity so that they come down upon the saints of God to destroy the church of God. That's their aim. Their aim is to destroy. So now he sees these three. These are called, in verse 14, spirits of devils working miracles. All three claim that. Read the National Enquirer if you doubt that. We're living in a time when paganism is now in again. It's the in thing. We're having I used to point out years ago, it's changed now, but for many years, Mohammedanism was the fastest growing religion in the United States, and you could throw in Catholicism and all Protestantism, and it's still outweighed it in the United States. It's still growing strong. If you doubt that, ask Ali. He can tell you. He's mouthy enough, he'll tell you. But then look at today, paganism. Paganism is shaming everybody and everything with its occult, with everything that is connected with it. No wonder this great city is called Babylon, united together to disconcert God's people. But it said that they would gather the whole world. A lot of people do not know, they do not realize that this past council of the Catholic Church, in the last session they held, the Jews paid millions and millions of dollars to key members of that council to sit in on a secret council to bring about a unity to further the ecumenical movement. Yes, they did. I have the documentation on it. That's God's truth. The Catholic Church and the Jews are working hand in glove. Do you know what the payoff was? The payoff was this, that these same Catholics voted that the Jews never crucified Jesus. Have you read that? You wonder why the Jews and the Catholics are working so closely now? This is just beginning to come to the surface. There's evidence for any man that wants to read, but that's not the half of it. The Catholics and the Protestants are trying behind the scenes to get together. I mentioned the other night that the Catholic priests are being taught to immerse. You think they're becoming more like God in the Bible? That's not their aim. They are urging their people to read the Bible, but you can't unite Methodists and Lutherans and others who believe in the Bible. You can't unite people who immerse if the Catholic Church does not read the Bible and if they don't immerse. So the Catholic Church is making concessions. Yet at the same time, the Catholic Church is becoming more liberal all the time. You can see it. These seem to be contradictory. They're not contradictory at all. It's all the master plan and the scheme to be able to adjust Protestantism to Judaism and Catholicism to Protestantism. You see it all working together, and all of them working together, even have seances in their services. Did you read the other day that Billy Graham stated that there's life on Mars, and he'd probably be like the average man that you meet in town if you were to meet him? Where did he get that idea? It's not by faith. How can a man be so wild as to suppose that? There's no scientific proof. I think the experiments at Mars prove that. You know, you saw that, I suppose, that where three of these men and NASA were supposed to have said that they found evidence of life on Mars. Did you read that? I bought a copy and made a copy of it, and Marshall called my attention to it because I saw him get it. He said, well, we're going to put that in our file. You know what the evidence was? They found living beings on Mars that you couldn't see. They breathed, but you couldn't see them. You couldn't find them. There was no evidence of them. And when they died, you didn't know they died. Ridiculous. I tell you, how in the world can you say that a thing breathes and a thing eats, and you can't find the thing that he eats, and after he eats it, you can't find any evidence of it, and when he dies, you can't find evidence of it, and you can't see the thing? But all 5 of those men are Jews. Don't you ever forget it. All 5 of them. They were bound to find life on Mars, and if they couldn't find it, they're going to make it. I told Marshall, I said, I'm going to keep one thing. That was the first article that came out when they landed that thing on Mars and made their first experiment. Before they got the results back, they said, if we don't find tangible evidence of life on Mars, we're going to have to restructure evolution and re-explain it. And I said to Marshall, we want to hold them to it if we can. They didn't find life on Mars. Are they trying to restructure evolution? No, they're still hanging on. You know, dogs die hard and slow. These 3 are working together. They don't believe alike. They are working together against God to battle of that great day of God Almighty. And I just sort of believe there's a strong possibility, though I can't guarantee anything, that we move slowly toward that final conflict between the devilish forces. While they're worshiping him more and more, it seems to me the devil is coming out in great pride. These are troublous days, and you know they are. And a battle of the great day of God Almighty. Behold, I come as a thief, and he connects it with his second coming. That's the way he's going to come. And that's the way he closes things down. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked, and they see his shame. And he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. Now, of course, that Armageddon comes from Harmageddon, which was hill country. It was the old battlefield. It was there Josiah the king was killed. It was there that Deborah and Barak were able to defeat Sisera, and many other significant battles were fought there. They were decisive battles, and the interesting thing is, this is supposed to be the battlefield, they tell us, where the last battle is fought, where Christ will lead his host against the devil and his host, and they can't get 10,000 soldiers in that place. You couldn't even land one of our medium bombers there. You couldn't get the thing off the ground. It's not big enough. It wouldn't even be large enough for a launching pad for one of our rockets. I can see if you've got a few soldiers fighting, you might get in that place and fight it out. But our modern warfare, friend, let's think. He's talking about a place that was noted for battles of strategic importance. He doesn't right here call it the Battle of Armageddon. He just says that he gathered them together into a place called Hebrew tongue Armageddon. And the 7th angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the heaven from the throne saying, "It is done." It is done. And there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. And the great city was divided in 3 parts. And the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God. Now they were fighting, but they're not fighting now. To give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. This is always the language we have seen of the last day. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. And there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent, and men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, for the plague thereof is exceeding great. Someone says, you reckon that's an atomic bomb? I sort of doubt it. You know, when God ends things, he's not going to end it. He's not going to allow men to end it with an atomic bomb. Peter said that they'll melt with fervent heat, and no man pulls a trigger or pushes a button. God himself does. You say, what is that? I'll be frank, I don't know. I think it's symbolic language. I know one thing, it's explained, it's the end. That's what he calls it. It's done, ended, finished, over. That's what he's trying to get across. We saw it here, and we see it here. It's the final end. But in chapter 17, we covered most of this chapter when we studied 13th chapter, the beast. But let us make a rundown on this. there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I'll show thee the judgment of the great whore. Now at this point, he's turning to explanatory visions. He's come to the end of time, but he's backing up. And notice, from this time on, he's talking about things he's already talked about. But it's like a teacher giving a lesson in mathematics and making the run through so they get the whole gist of the thought, and saying, now let me drop back and explain a little more in detail a few points. What he's doing. So one of the angels that had the 7 vials, see, the vials have already been poured out, but he comes back to explain, saying, I'll show you a little bit more. Unto thee the judgment of the great whore sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. We read that last night. So he carried me away in the spirit in the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. That's the beast of chapter 13. The Roman Empire. The one that Daniel saw. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the Mother of Harlots, an abomination of the earth. And don't you ever forget, my friend, if you think that this is limited just to the Catholic Church, you're in error. This is a woman who's called the Mother of Harlots. And I have placed that on the chart, because a harlot is a woman who claims every intimacy with a man as a husband, but she won't obey his voice, and she won't wear his name. She's a harlot. And the Catholic Church is a mother of harlots. And I don't think she's too wrong when she said, we're the mother of all other churches, referring to Protestantism. Who are these harlots? I ask people sometimes. I do. Who are the harlots? Nearly every Protestant will tell you that this woman is a Catholic Church. But what about the harlots? What about the daughters? You know, when Martin Luther came out, and I appreciate Martin Luther. I don't try to beat him down. I know he wasn't right in everything, but I tell you, if we came out of the Catholic Church when he did, we probably would have brought a lot of things with us too. But you know, Martin Luther took the position, we'll throw out only the things that the Bible specifically condemns. That's why the Lutherans have an altar. That's why he wears a garment similar to a priest. Many of their practices and their language the same as the Catholic Church, and the same with the Episcopalian Church. It depends on how far down the road of Rome these people have walked as to how they will walk and how they will talk. But there are harlots. And when I designed this chart, I tried to show that these people came directly out of Roman Catholicism. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration, really great wonder or appalled. And the angel said unto me, well, why did you marvel? I'll tell thee the mystery. And of the beast that carrieth her. Now I have down here the Roman Catholic version I read from the other night, where in chapter 13 and chapter 17 in the footnote that tell us that the beast is Rome, imperial Rome. You know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about this city right here. Now if the woman sat upon Rome, and that's imperial Rome, the beast is imperial Rome, she rode the beast. We have to identify the woman. Who is she? Let's read on. This woman was riding a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, or Rome, and the beast thou sawest was and is not, slain in 476, restored in 800, ascended out of the bottomless pit, going to perdition, and they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life of the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, is not, and yet is. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. Not real mountains. And there are 7 kings. That's what they are. They're kings or kingdoms. forms of government. 5 are fallen. Study history. At the time John wrote, 5 forms of government had already been formed and cast aside. In 31 BC, Augustus Caesar, the first emperor, started the rule of what is known as the Roman Empire. That's the 6th, and one is. So at the time John wrote, the imperial form was in existence. The other is not yet come. We pointed out that is the Exarchata Rabina, which you'll find over here, the Exarchata Rabina, that lasted a short space, he said. And the beast that was and is not, that is the beast that was destroyed and then restored or killed and brought to life again, he's the 8th. How can he be the 8th when there were only 7? He adds, and is of the 7. Which 7? Imperial form. That's what was restored. And goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but received power as kings 1 hour with the beast. It was an empire. They weren't independent kingdoms. These have one mind. Surely, it was an empire. And shall give their power and strength unto the beast. So all of Europe did that for a long time. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. Not instantly, but eventually. For he is the Lord of lords, and the King of kings. And they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. That's us. And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest where the whore sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So the Catholic Church ruled over many nations, many people, many languages. That was a universal rule. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore. Eventually, yes. He's just described about this hatred. And shall make her desolate and naked, shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire, for God hath put it into their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city. Now we have her called Babylon. She's called previously in verse 5, Mystery Babylon the Great. Now it says the woman is the city that reigneth over the kings of the earth. In this you'll find 2 good wives, two women rather, a good one and a bad one. The bride of Christ, and then we find the great city of Babylon, called the Mother of Harlots. 2 women. Also described as 2 cities, the city of God, and the same one, Mystery Babylon the great city. We've described that city before. I want you to note one thing in passing. He tells us that these 10 horns that supported the Catholic Church, making it the great Roman Empire, Holy Roman Empire, supporting the Catholic Church for so long, eventually came to hate the whore and destroyed her. We have studied that tonight. We have seen how these nations eventually stood on their feet and said, you will not rule over us anymore. Look at it from church history. They learned because of the translated Bible in 1450 that could be put on a printing press with movable type. And people read the Bible. Even though it was a death penalty to be found with the Bible, they hazarded their lives and read the Bible. They became discontented. They started a movement of reformation, but you don't reform a decadent institution. And so the Roman Catholic Church did what they could. They tried to kill Martin Luther. They did kill some, but still their voice rang out. And unfortunately splintered in different directions. And eventually these people rose and said, we'll destroy the Catholic Church, and they did. Even if they had to use a man like Napoleon to assist in it. Now just take a look and we'll find at the end that there was no such thing as papal states. The political power had been weakened. Eventually the political power was destroyed, but now even the religious power was minimized. The Pope was humiliated. But throughout all of this, when you study history, you're amazed. The Pope was exiled. Popes died imprisoned. The Vatican was robbed twice. They lost all pride, they lost all power, they lost all possessions, but they were still proud and they would not repent, and they have not to this day. You can see it if you travel in countries where Roman Catholicism is predominant. I tell you, Puerto Rico is an evidence of that. A lot of people leave the Catholic Church. Nominally, they belong to it. But they have simply absorbed all the basic cultures, all the pagan practices. They'll come out of the mountainsides and they'll go down the water. I believe you were down there, weren't you, Brother Ellis? You folks, when they did that, we saw them. You know, John the Baptist's day, and they come down into the ocean because they think their sins are washed away. We like to never find a parking place. You go everywhere trying to find a parking place. They come down by the thousands and thousands and thousands. And they believe that they get in the water and they wash around in the water, their sins are washed away. That's a pagan practice. But the Catholics go along with it. You'll see the little children building bonfires on a certain day. All over the city you'll see them building bonfires. And they'll write things on paper and burn them. It's a pagan practice. Because they believe that their sins will be washed away. New Year's night, you better not go into old San Juan, though. And I'll tell you, you'll have water dumped on you. They take a bath. Just before the hour strikes. They dip the water out and they start pouring it down on the streets. And those streets are narrow. Just room for one car, and that's all. We had a friend with us down there one time and said, let's go over there. I had my window rolled down. I ought to have known better than that. Here's an old drunk came over. There's a sailor. He was laughing at them, looking up in the balcony, and I rolled my window down to try to tell him, you ought to come get out of the way, fella. You're going to get wet. And he turned around. He looked at me to see what I was doing, and I watched that bucket. That bucket came over like this, hit him square in the face, splashed all over my suit. Everything in the car was wet. You say, why a practice like that? Because they took a bath and washed away their sins for the whole year. They've got more practices than to wash away their sins for the whole year. They ought to be real clean. But you see, Roman Catholicism will do anything. They merge with the people. They adjust to their local customs and practices. They exercise the power. But you know, Roman Catholicism is not as powerful in Puerto Rico as it once was. I can remember the time when the first man was put in office that was not a Roman Catholic, and you do too. It's before we went down there. It made history. People couldn't understand it. They were shaking the yoke like many other countries. So we have this great city destroyed. Chapter 18. After these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lighted with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, is fallen. Now this is past tense. He simply declared it to be a fact. Become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. And the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Now we close with that point. That's the introduction to what he's going to say. From there on, he describes how that people had become rich and wealthy and powerful and strong through cooperating with Roman Catholicism. No wonder they wept, they wailed at the fall of Roman Catholicism. We have chosen to sing a song tonight that talks about the great victory and the great glory. We sang it the other night, 185, conquering now and still to conquer. I think we'll sing all three stanzas of these, and let's try to sing it with our hearts. Conquering now and still to conquer, ride up the king in his might, leading the hosts and all the faithful into the midst of the fight, singing with courage and advancing, clad in their brilliant array, shouting victory is promised through grace. Conquer me now and still to conquer. Who is the wonderful King? Where shall the armies which he leadeth, while of his glory they sing? He is the Lord and Redeemer and Savior